Human beings are wired for connection, and intimacy is one of the most powerful ways our brains experience security and belonging. When intimacy is missing, the brain begins to experience subtle yet significant shifts in how it processes emotions, stress, and memory. A lack of close touch, meaningful eye contact, or genuine emotional sharing can reduce levels of oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone. Oxytocin not only creates feelings of trust and safety but also protects the brain from the damaging effects of prolonged stress. Without it, the stress hormone cortisol rises and becomes dominant. This imbalance makes the brain hypervigilant, always scanning for threats and unable to fully relax. Over time, this constant stress damages the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory and learning. You might notice it's harder to focus, or your memory feels weaker. Beyond this, the absence of intimacy diminishes serotonin and dopamine, the brain's natural feel-good chemicals, leaving people more prone to mood swings, irritability, and even depressive thought patterns. What might start as loneliness or a craving for closeness can transform into neural pathways shaped by isolation. The brain adapts to what it experiences most, and if intimacy is absent, the circuits that process trust, bonding, and warmth weaken, making it harder in the future to build or maintain meaningful closeness. This creates a cycle where the lack of intimacy rewires the brain toward disconnection, which then feeds back into behaviors that push intimacy further away. When intimacy is missing, the brain's reward system struggles to find balance. Normally, a hug, a kind word, or simply being present with someone you care about triggers dopamine, the neurotransmitter that lights up the brain's motivation centers. This system evolved to reinforce social bonds and encourage cooperative living. Without those small but vital sparks of intimacy, the brain searches for other ways to stimulate dopamine. Some people may turn to food, screens, or addictive behaviors because these offer artificial bursts of reward. Yet these replacements are shallow and often leave the brain more depleted in the long run. Intimacy has a regulating effect that no substitute can fully provide. The lack of this regulation contributes to what scientists call anhedonia, a reduced ability to feel pleasure. This doesn't just affect mood. It alters the wiring of the prefrontal cortex, which is central to decision-making, impulse control, and long-term planning. People may find themselves stuck in cycles of procrastination, unable to set goals, or constantly chasing stimulation without ever feeling satisfied. At the same time, without intimacy, sleep cycles are disrupted because oxytocin and serotonin help regulate melatonin, the sleep hormone. Poor sleep further stresses the brain, weakening memory consolidation and emotional stability. What seems like a missing relationship or closeness extends far deeper. Intimacy is a neurological nutrient, and without it, the brain starves in ways that show up across cognition, behavior, and mental health. The absence of intimacy has profound consequences on emotional regulation. Intimacy acts like a buffer, soothing the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear and threat detection. In close relationships, even a gentle touch or warm look can quiet this hyperactive alarm system. Without it, the amygdala grows more reactive, increasing anxiety and making everyday stressors feel overwhelming. This hyperarousal state pushes the nervous system into survival mode, prioritizing short-term safety over long-term growth. The brain begins to perceive the world as less safe, which reduces trust in others and encourages withdrawal. Over time, this can lead to social anxiety, paranoia, or difficulty maintaining healthy relationships. Intimacy also plays a key role in building emotional resilience. When someone listens and validates your feelings, your brain learns to process emotions more smoothly. Without that support, emotions often become bottled up, and the prefrontal cortex struggles to regulate the storm triggered by the amygdala. This imbalance contributes to patterns of rumination, overthinking, and difficulty recovering from setbacks. Furthermore, the lack of intimacy undermines self-esteem. Brain imaging studies show that social exclusion lights up the same neural pathways as physical pain. In other words, loneliness hurts in the brain just as much as a physical injury. When intimacy is missing for too long, this pain becomes chronic, altering both emotional perception and personality. People may become more defensive, more irritable, or more detached, not because they want to, but because the brain is reshaping itself in response to isolation. The brain doesn't just passively experience the absence of intimacy, it adapts to it, and not always in healthy ways. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, means that long-term lack of intimacy creates new pathways that reinforce isolation. For example, if someone goes years without consistent affection, their brain may down-regulate oxytocin receptors, making it harder to feel bonded even when intimacy is available again. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for empathy and perspective taking, can become underactive, while the amygdala remains overactive. This shift produces a pattern where people misinterpret social cues, assume rejection, or expect betrayal. Such changes can also impact language and communication, as the regions involved in emotional expression weaken without practice in safe, intimate contexts. The lack of intimacy also heightens vulnerability to mental health conditions such as depression, generalized anxiety, or even cognitive decline in older age. For instance, research links chronic loneliness with faster progression of Alzheimer's disease, likely due to reduced stimulation of brain circuits that thrive on social interaction. The brain requires regular interpersonal exercise, just as muscles need physical activity. Without it, atrophy sets in. Yet the tragedy lies in how these changes make intimacy even harder to restore. People who feel disconnected often crave closeness but simultaneously feel overwhelmed by it. This paradox is a direct result of the brain's attempt to protect itself, but in doing so, it traps people in cycles of isolation that worsen with time. Beyond the neurological changes, a lack of intimacy shapes how the brain constructs identity and meaning. Intimacy provides mirrors through which we understand ourselves. When someone listens deeply or shares vulnerability, the brain maps that interaction as part of self-awareness. Without it, identity can feel fragile, fragmented, or overly dependent on external validation. Studies show that the medial prefrontal cortex, which processes self-referential thoughts, is more active when people think about themselves in the context of close relationships. Remove intimacy, and this area struggles, leaving people more susceptible to feelings of emptiness or a loss of purpose. The absence of intimacy also magnifies existential stress, as the brain yearns for belonging but receives silence. This gap between need and reality often triggers overcompensation in work, achievements, or appearances people try to fill the void. Yet these pursuits rarely quiet the brain circuits that crave human closeness. Another striking impact is how creativity suffers. Intimacy fuels imagination by providing emotional safety and new perspectives. Without it, the brain narrows focus, becoming more rigid, repetitive, and risk-averse. This limits problem-solving and innovation. In short, intimacy is not just about love or connection, it's a vital part of how the brain builds identity, meaning, and creative energy. Its absence leads to a brain that feels stuck, ungrounded, and constantly searching for something it cannot quite name. Finally, the long-term absence of intimacy reshapes the brain in ways that influence physical health. Chronic isolation and lack of emotional closeness elevate cortisol, which damages neurons and reduces neurogenesis, the birth of new brain cells. This weakens memory and accelerates cognitive aging. The immune system is also compromised because the brain and body work as one network. Loneliness signals the brain to prepare for danger, keeping the body in a low-grade inflammatory state. Inflammation affects not only mood but also cardiovascular health, metabolic processes, and susceptibility to illness. On a neurological level, the anterior cingulate cortex, involved in both emotional pain and physical pain, becomes more sensitive, increasing the perception of suffering. This creates a vicious loop where the brain feels more pain, both emotional and physical, in the absence of intimacy. Sleep disturbances, common among lonely people, further intensify these problems, as the brain cannot repair itself adequately without deep rest. The combination of poor sleep, chronic stress, and weakened social circuits makes the brain more fragile over time. Yet, the hopeful side of this story lies in neuroplasticity. The same brain that adapts to a lack of intimacy can also heal through consistent, meaningful connection. Even small steps like regular eye contact, shared laughter, or physical touch can reignite dormant circuits, rebuild oxytocin pathways, and reduce cortisol. This demonstrates that while the absence of intimacy harms the brain profoundly, the return of intimacy, even later in life, has the power to restore balance, resilience, and vitality.